Hi everyone, I'm Julia, the chemistry tutor. Today I'm going to talk about nomenclature of acids. I have another video on nomenclature of covalent compounds and another video on nomenclature of your polyatomic ions. And those are your three types of compounds that you're ever going to have to name: ionic compounds, covalent compounds, and acids. And this video is going to be about nomenclature of acids. So let's get started. Okay, so here are our rules for nomenclature of acids. So first thing to recognize is that acids have hydrogens in the front, always have hydrogens in the front. Okay, so that's how you'll know it's an acid, hydrogens in the front. No charge. There's no charge on acids. So they have enough hydrogens to balance out the negative charge on the anion. Okay, and they have oxygens and or AQ in the back, telling us that it's an acid with oxygens, an oxyacid, or a binary acid that does not have oxygens. Binary acids typically have the AQ in the back. Sometimes, depending on your instructor, your oxyacids will also have AQ in the back. Okay? So our rules are, okay, oh, by the way, these are named from your anions. Okay, so all of those anions that we've memorized, all of those polyatomic ions. Oh, look, I already have that written there. Named from your anions. Okay? So our first rule is if the anion were an 8, like nitrate, it becomes an ic acid, nitric acid. So your anion, right, was nitrate. You take the root, nitra, and add ic acid, nitric acid. Okay. Your second rule is if you are an ite, you become an ouse acid. Like nitrite, the root, nitra, becomes nitrous acid. Okay. I remember that by the saying I ate something ick at the White House. Ate goes to ick, ite goes to ouse. Okay. So those are your oxyacids. All of those have oxygens in the back. Okay, your binary acids, bi meaning two, there's only hydrogen and one other type of atom. Okay, binary acids, your anion was an ide, like chloride, nitride, becomes a hydroic acid. So nitride, hydronitric acid. Okay, and those will typically have the AQ in the back. So over on the left, I have some acids written down that we are going to determine what the name of them are. And then when we're done with that, we're going to take the name and we're going to go back to the formula. Okay, so here I'll write that in there. That is your formula. Okay, so you will notice all of these have hydrogens in the front, right? Our rule is hydrogens in the front, no charge, and typically oxygens or aqueous in the back. AQ means aqueous, it's in water. Okay, so all of these have hydrogens in the front. There's no charge on any of them, and they all have either oxygens or AQ in the back. So they are all acids. Okay, so we're going to start with that first one, HClO4. Okay, so we ignore the hydrogen and we just look at the anion. Okay, so remember when we memorized all of our polyatomic ions, we know that the chlorate from clam has the three oxygens and the -1 charge. One more oxygen, so one more oxygen than that, right? You are a per 8, so perchlorate. Okay, and our rule is over here, our 8 goes to ic acid. Okay, so our 8 is just going to become ic acid. So that is perchloric acid. Our 8 just became ic acid. Okay, so over here we've got, that's our chlorate from clam. So that is chlorate. Okay, our 8 becomes ic acid, so same exact rule. So that is going to just be chloric acid. Our next one less oxygen than our 8 becomes an ite, so that is chlorite. Okay, and our rule is ite becomes aus. Okay, so that is chlorous acid. We just take the end of the anion name and change it to 8 goes to ich, ite goes to aus. Okay, so now we've got 1 oxygen, so it's 2 less oxygens than that. So that is the hypo, right? So 1 less oxygen is an ite, 2 less oxygens is the hypoite. So that is hypochlorite. Ite goes to aus, same rule. Beginning just stays the same, so that is hypochlorous acid. So the next one, we will notice there's no oxygens. I have an AQ instead of oxygens. And our rule is if there's no oxygens, it's a hydroic acid. So I'm just going to write no oxygens here. But its name was ide, so that was chloride. And if you're an ide, you become a hydrochloric acid. So the hydroic acid. Okay, so I did that trend so you can see all of them. Both of your 8s, your per 8 and your 8 goes to an ic acid. Both of your ites, your ite and your hypoite goes to aus acid. And then if there's no oxygens at all, it is always a hydroic acid every single time. So let's do a few more. Here, looking at this ion, I have sulfate, right, from our supper. He's got 4 oxygens and 2 negative charge. So that's sulfate. Our rule is 8 goes to ic acid. Okay, so for sulfur ions, we add the back in. Okay, so that is sulfuric acid. Okay, we just add that back in there because sulfic acid sounds weird. So we put the back in. For sulfur, we do the same thing for phosphorus. Phosphate goes to phosphoric. Okay. Okay, and by the way, you'll notice I'm really bad about this. You will need to check with your instructor on how picky they are about whether you're capitalizing the beginning or not. I get really bad about that. So if your instructor's picky, make sure you know what it is they want on capitalizing those. Okay. So now I've got on this one, we knew 4 oxygens with sulfate. So 1 less oxygen becomes the ite. So that is sulfite. Okay. And our rule is ite goes to aus acid. So my sulfite goes to sul. We put the back in there. Aus acid, sulfurous acid. Okay. So now this next one here, we notice there's no oxygens. There's an AQ instead of oxygen. And if they don't write the AQ, it would just look like HBr. Okay. Typically, it needs an AQ to identify that it's an acid that's been put into water and not a covalent compound, which would be a gas. Okay. So no oxygens is always the hydroic acid. So that is, I'm going to put no oxygens. Its name was bromide. Okay, so hydroic, that's going to be hydro. Brom is the root, ic, acid. Hydroic acid. Okay. The next one, that's one of the ones that we think is going to be really, really tough, but it's got all this stuff in it. It's CHO 232. That's your acetate. Our rule is 8 goes to ic acid. So our 8 goes to ic acid. That's acetic acid. Here we've got PO3. We know from Phoenix that it's got phosphate has 4 oxygens and a 3 negative charge. So now I have one less oxygen. That's phosphite. Oop. Okay, our ite goes to aus acid. So phos, we put the back in there, phosphoric. Oh, aus, we're going to aus. Phosphorus acid. Here we've got the 4 oxygens, that's our phosphate. And our rule is 8 goes to ic acid. So our phosphate goes to phos. We put the back in there, ic acid, phosphoric acid. Because phosphoric acid would sound weird, so we put the back in there. Sulfur and phosphorus, we put the back in those. Okay, so here we've got 5 oxygens. We know from supper. Sulfate has the 4 oxygens and the 2 negative. So I've got one more oxygen. This is per sulfate. 8 goes to ic acid. So that is per sulfur. Put the back in there. Ic acid. Oop. The per just stayed the same. You just changed your 8 to ic acid. Here we've got the I, so that's a halogen, right? And we know from clam, your halogens have 3 oxygens and a 1 negative. So we have one more oxygen, so it is a per, that is per iodate. Okay, so that becomes per iodic acid. And the reason I do this one is because you read it and you say periodic acid. What is periodic acid? That is per iodic acid. So it's the per iodate ion, one more oxygen than your iodate. Okay. So now on the next one, I have no oxygens. So that was sulfide. Okay, and remember, no oxygens is a hydroic acid. So that is hydro. Put the back in. Sulfuric acid, hydroic acid. Okay. So now again, we've got no oxygens. That was bromide. Okay, so we know it's a hydroic. So that's hydrobromic acid, hydroic acid. And the last one we have on there, we know from Nick in our Nick the Camel saying, nitrate has 3 oxygens and a 1 negative charge, so this is nitrate. And we know our 8 goes to ic acid, so that is nitric acid. Okay, so not so bad. You just follow those 3 rules every single time. And remember, I ate something ic. That's how I remember that first rule. And the second rule, I ate something ic at the White House. 8 goes to ic, ite goes to aus. And if it has no oxygens at all, it's always the hydroic acid. Okay, every single time. Now we're going to go back from the name and figure out the formula. So if you've been working along with me there on your paper at home, cover up the formulas as if they were not there and do the formula on the other side or another piece of paper. So just cover up the formulas. Now we're going to go from name back to formula. Okay. So on this one, I look at the name and I see that it's an ic acid. So I know it came from the 8 ion. Ic goes back to 8. So this was perchloric. So we know it's the perchlorate. I'm going to need to give myself some room there. So that is our perchlorate. Okay. So our perchlorate ion, we know that from clam, sorry. We know that the chlorate has 3 oxygens and a 1 negative. So the perchlorate has 1 more oxygen. Okay. And we know the charge on that from clam is a -1, 1 negative, right? So if I add hydrogens, I have to add hydrogens to balance that charge to 0. Okay, and hydrogen is a +1, so I need 1 hydrogen on that. That is our formula for perchloric acid. I'm going to rewrite that, give myself some more space there. Okay, so since hydrogen is a +1, you always add whatever your negative charge is, you add that many hydrogens. Okay, so now we look at the next one. It is again an ic acid, so it came from 8. So it was chloric, so it came from chlorate. We know from clam in Nick the Camel that chlorate has 3 oxygens and a 1 negative. Chlorate has 3 oxygens and a 1 negative, so it needs 1 hydrogen. There's your chloric acid. Okay, chlorus, aus, comes from the ite. So aus goes to ite, so that was chlorus, so that's the chlorite ion. Okay, we know the ite has 1 less oxygen. So ite has 2 oxygens, chlorite, and it's a 1 negative, so it needs 1 hydrogen, 1 positive hydrogen to make that charge equal 0. Now, the next one, again, we've got the aus acid, so it came from the ite, so hypochlorous becomes hypochlorite. That's 2 less oxygens than the 8, right? So that's hypochlorous. Chlorite. Hypochlorite is 2 less oxygens than the 8. So it's just ClO. It's also a -1, so it needs 1 hydrogen to make that equal 0. There's your hypochlorous acid. Okay. Here you see that it's a hydroic acid. Your hydroic acids have no oxygens on them. So we go no oxygens, which that was chloride. I'd have no oxygens. Okay, so we know it's just a chloride, and chloride's -1, so it gets 1 hydrogen, HCl. You're going to see that one a lot. And remember, typically, if there's no oxygens, you put the AQ in the back, saying that it's dissolved in water. It's aqueous. So I'm going to put an AQ on that. Okay. So now the next one, we have an ic acid. So we know it came from the 8 ion, so sulfuric becomes from sulfate. We know from supper that it's got 4 oxygens and a 2 negative. So I've got 4 oxygens and a 2 negative. So now, since hydrogen's a 1 positive, I need 2 hydrogens for that whole thing to equal 0. So I've got H2SO4. Okay, and we do not leave our charges there because there's no charges in a compound. Okay, so now for my next one, I have an aus acid. We know aus comes from ite, and ite has 1 less oxygen. So 1 less oxygen than your sulfate. So I've got, and that's also a -2. So it needs 2 hydrogens to make that charge be 0, H2SO3. So our next one, we have another hydroic acid. So hydro means there's no oxygens. So it's hydrobromic, so we know there's no oxygens. That was bromide, was the ion. Okay, so there's no oxygens. Bromide is a 1 negative, so it needs 1 hydrogen to make that equal 0. The next one is again an ic acid. So it came from acetic acid, was from acetate. Acetate is that CHO 2, 3, 2, and it's a -1, so it needs 1 hydrogen to make it equal 0. So now we've got an Aus acid, and remember, Aus comes from ite. So phosphorus came from phosphite. And we know from Phoenix that it's got 4 oxygens and a 3 negative for the phosphate. So phosphite is 1 less oxygen. Okay, so it's PO3 with a -3. So it needs 3 hydrogens to make it equal 0. So whatever your negative charge is, that's how many hydrogens you add to make it equal 0. So now on my next one, I have an ic acid. So we know ic comes from 8. So that's my phosphate ion. And like we said earlier, we know from Phoenix, it's got 4 oxygens and a -3. It has a -3, so it needs 3 hydrogens to make it equal 0. So now I've got another ic acid. Ic comes from 8. So periodic comes from periodate. And we know from your halogens, iodine is a halogen. We know from clam that iodate has 3 oxygens and a -1. So periodate has 1 more oxygen. And it's a -1, so it needs 1 hydrogen. Wow, that iodine got really big. Our next one, we have a hydro. So a hydroic and hydroics have no oxygens. So this came from no oxygens. It came from sulfide. Okay. So we know there's no oxygens. Sulfide on the periodic table is a -2, so it needs 2 hydrogens. And since there's no oxygens, we need to put the aqueous in the back. So let's put our AQ back there. I think I forgot an aqueous up here. Yep, HBr. I forgot the aqueous on hydrobromic acid. Okay, so now I've got... Oh, I did hydrobromic acid twice. Okay, well, let's do hydrobromic acid again. So we've got the hydroic acid. Hydros come from no oxygens. So that came from bromide. No oxygens. Bromide is a -1, so it needs 1 hydrogen and an aqueous on it. And now our last one, we've got nitric acid. Ic acid comes from the 8 ion. So nitric acid came from nitrate. We know from Nick, in the Nick the Camel saying, it's got 3 oxygens and a -1. So 3 oxygens, -1 needs 1 hydrogen. So that is your nomenclature for acids. Okay, they all have hydrogens in the front. There's no charge on them. They typically have either oxygen or AQ in the back. They will have oxygen or not oxygen in the back. Okay, so you'll notice all of these have oxygen or not oxygen in the back. Sometimes they can have AQ, sometimes they don't. Depends on your instructor. You'll have to check with your instructor on that. Okay, so remember the saying, I ate something ick at the White House. Ate goes to ick, ite goes to ouse. No oxygens is always the hydroic. So there's nomenclature for your acids. And that's all I have to say about that. Have a great day.